Hey, welcome. This is Lee Waller, and I am in Unreal Engine 5.5's Motion Design Tools. In a previous tutorial, part 1 of Complex Shapes, I went over how to import SVGs and to work with those SVGs to extrude those shapes and make them into 3D meshes. In part 2, this tutorial here, I'm going to go over how to use splines to draw shapes, create shapes, and extrude those into 3D meshes. In case you're not familiar with what a spline is, it is a line that is made up of a series of points. It's going to need to be at least 2 points that help determine the shape of that line. A spline does not render geometry itself, but it can be used to create geometry. So the spline that you see in front of you now is made up of 2 points and a segment. The motion design tools in Unreal offer a few options. You can draw these yourself, or you can use predefined shapes. I'm going to go over both of those in this tutorial and then how to use those to create a static mesh. I'm going to go ahead and delete this real quick so we can start from the beginning. Over here in our motion design tools, you'll see actors, and we'll have the spline actor right there. The way that I've begun to work with these is I'm just going to double click that spline actor, and it drops this line in. You'll see the spline actor over here in the motion design outliner, and we have the details with a number of options in there that we're going to explore. The first shape that I'm going to create is that of a shield. In doing that, I should be able to introduce you to most of the properties you'll use in creating these splines. Again, this spline has 2 points. You can click on those points there. You'll see that you have a gizmo and you also have handles with them. The gizmo can be used to move those points in location in the 3D space, and then the handles can be used to shape the line. I'm going to reset that, and to create a circle, Unreal gives you a few predefined options. To set that up, I'm going to deselect the spline, and then I'm going to select it again here in the middle and right-click on it, and I'm going to add a spline point here. I'm going to check the location of this because I want it dead center. So I'll drop down here, and out of all the times I've done this, I actually did drop it in dead center. But in case it's not, go right here to location and set that to 0. After setting that third point in there, I'm going to delete these other 2 points. I'm going to select this end one here and then simply delete it, and then jump back over here to the left and delete that one. And I'm left with that 1 point. From there, I'm going to right click again, and we have all of these options that we can use to work with these points and the spline. We'll go over a lot of these throughout this tutorial. The one that I want to look at right now is the spline generation tool. I'm going to click on it. It opens up this tool that floats, and I'm going to use the circle right there. Click on it, and you can't see it because it's laying flat. We will rotate that in just a moment. But we've created a circle, and you'll notice that it is off to the left side. We'll straighten that out in just a moment. I'm going to set this for 4 points, so this is going to make it a little bit easier to use those 4 points in reshaping this into the shield. And then I'm going to bring the radius of this up to 200 to make this a little bit larger. Some of the other parameters that are available, you can reverse the direction of this. If you're wanting something to follow this path and flow with this path, I'm going to leave this as is right now. I do want to deselect this keep first key tangent, and that's going to help center up the circle. With that selected, I don't need to branch right, and I'm going to leave everything else as it is. The circle's been created, and so now I'm just going to close out this spline generation tool. I want to be able to see this, so I'm going to rotate it now on 90 degrees right here on the y-axis. There's our circle. And I'm going to bring that down in Z space to a -200 so that we can see all of it. Now, one thing that it's done is it looks like there's 4 points on this, but there's actually 5. This just comes from me working with this. That's why I know that. We can review those points by coming over here into the details panel, and you'll see this selected points. If you're not seeing that, make sure that that spline actor is selected there. And then we can jump through those points with these controls right here. I'm just going to jump around. Right now, we're on input key 0. It starts off at 0, then it'll jump to 1, 2, 3, and 4. But we're right back at the location we began with, If I click one more time, we're back at 0. So that actually means that there's 5 points in here and I only want 4. So what I'm going to do is make sure I'm on that 4th point right there. And just to show you this, I'm going to drag that off to the side, bring it up a little bit. You can see that we have 5 points and also that this is not closed. I do want this to be closed. So I'm going to drop down into our details panel here, and we have this option right here to close that loop. I'm going to click it. It closes the loop, and I'm going to delete this 4th point right there. Make sure it's selected and hit delete. And now we have our circle with 4 points. We looked at just a little bit earlier these handles, or as Unreal Engine refers to them as tangents, and these tangents will help us shape our spline. We can click on them and drag them. One of the things you may notice right now is if I click on one of them and drag it, it affects the other one. And a lot of times when we're reshaping a spline, we may not want those two locked together. So they do give you the option, just go to one of the splines, right click on it, and down here you can click on Allow Discontinuous Splines. Click on that, and that will separate the tangents here, and we can move them individually. I'm going to reset that. You'll also find that option over here in the details panel. If we scroll all the way down, you'll see it right there, Allow Discontinuous Spline. So it can be checked there also. If you're wanting to add more points into your spline, you can right click. You'll see you have a number of options here to delete a spline point, duplicate the spline point. You can select points on these different options here. You can change the type of spline. Right now it's on curved. I can set that to linear. Let me undo that. And constant. You have the option to reset it to an automatic tangent. There's our spline generation tool. We can focus on a certain area that's selected, and then we have a number of snap and align options. If you're going to stay in this perspective when reshaping your spline, you might want to turn on Visualize Roll and Scale. You'll see here that it gives you the ability to see how this is bending, not only on this 2D plane here, but also on all 3 planes. I'm going to go back in here and turn that off. The way that I'm going to reshape this into a shield is I'm actually going to jump out of the camera here, shut that camera off, and then up here in camera, I'm going to drop down to default viewport right here. That's going to give me the option now to go from perspective view to either top, bottom, left, right, front, or back. Now to begin to reshape this, I'm going to go to the back view of this shape, which is pretty much the view we're seeing right now. Click on it, and you may need to reposition the viewer. I'm just using the right click on the mouse to grab a hold of this space and move that around. And then if you want to zoom in and zoom out, I'm using the scroll wheel there. In this perspective, it's going to lock our movement to the Y and Z plane that we're on here. That way I don't have to worry about it being deformed in 3D space. To start changing the shape of this, I'm going to grab these 2 points right here, click on the first one there, and then I'm going to hold down the control button and click the second one. That gives me the option to hold both of them at the same time, and I'm going to drag them up, and you can see that we're starting to create a look of a shield. I'm going to drop those 2 right there, and then I'll go into the tangents on each of them. And let me just double check. Yes, I'm still disconnected there, and we'll start with this one. And to move these tangents, you'll click on the tangent, and of course you'll have the gizmo there, and I'm going to grab it right in that area and just start dragging it down and start moving it into place till I kind of get the shape that I want. I'll just go with that for right now, and then I'm going to do that on the other side, try to mirror that. Click on that tangent and bring it down. And one nice thing about being in this mode is that snapping is on right now. And if your snapping is not on, you can click snapping on by clicking here, here, and here. And that's going to snap our tangents into place based on our settings up here. You can also check to see where these tangents are located in this space right down here. So I have 0.3 right there. You'll see 0.3 right there. And you'll see the tangents right down here, arrive tangent and leave tangent. And you can use those to match up the tangents from side to side. Of course, they're going to be slightly different. So this one right here, let me drag it around, and you can notice that on the X and Y there, those positions are changing. And so I'll set that to, let's say, that 8.6 right there by a negative 340. And then I'll jump over here and click on this tangent. And I have a negative 8.6. And I need to match it up right there to a negative 340. And so now I know that those are symmetrical in shape. This is a pretty basic shape, but there's a lot more you can do with it. You can change any of these points and adjust their tangents. So I'll make just a few more minor adjustments to this. And just check those two right there to make sure they're at the same distance. Bring this back up just a little bit. And so I'll go with this at this point. Now what we can do with this is create a mesh out of this shape. I'm going to go back into my perspective view right here. And then to use this to create a mesh, we're going to need to go into the modeling mode. Right now we're in motion design mode. We can go here, click on that, and go into modeling mode. We're in the create tab right now, and we have a number of options here, but what we need is this mesh splines. For that to be active, I need to make sure that that spline actor is selected. With that selected now, you'll see that it is active, and we can click on that, and it creates a mesh inside of that spline. I'm going to rotate this so that we can see it a little bit better. And right now, it is a flat, pretty much flat 2D object. If that's what you're wanting to create, you're not going to need to do much more than that. You will need to hit accept, and then that object will show up over here under the name triangulation. We'll see that in just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and review the options that we have on making this into a mesh. We can extrude it. Let me roll this back just a little bit more so we can see the front of it. And our properties for this are over here under triangulate splines right there. And so these are the properties that we have to work with. I'm going to go ahead and show wireframes so that you can see the mesh that's being created. These points here determine how smooth these curves are. That is managed right here under this error tolerance. I'm going to go ahead and crank that up because it's kind of works opposite of the way that you might think. If I bring this up, you'll see that we actually get fewer points and we get less curve in the shape. So we actually want to bring this back down, and I'm not sure why, but right now you have to scrub on this. This may be just a glitch that they need to fix. You need to scrub this value for it to take an effect. So I'm going to bring that on down, and I'm going to try to set it down to about 0.1 because I want these curves to be as smooth as possible. So let me keep on bringing that down, and I'll set it to about 0.1. You'll see there we are creating a lot of geometry, but that's really going to make this look smooth. The next thing is the extrude on this and how thick that extrude is. You'll see that it's set at 0. So right now this object is not being extruded, but we can bring that on up and you'll see that we can create the amount of depth that we want with this. Now for a shield, I don't want a whole lot of depth, so I'm going to set that to 2. And the way that this is extruding is from the spline forward. Again, let me crank that up so you can see that. And so if we want to reverse that, you can click that option right there, and it will extrude from the spline in the opposite direction. I'll go ahead and set all of that back. You have an option on the output type. Most of the time, I'm going to go with static mesh. You can create a volume or dynamic mesh, but most of the time, we just need that static mesh. If you want to go ahead and apply a material to this, you can do that here, and then also adjust the UVs for it. I'm going to bring this back around on the rotation, and I'm going to go ahead and set this. We'll use this spline to add another piece to this in just a moment. So once we've adjusted all of our properties the way that we want them, we hit accept on it, and we're left with that spline actor, which is really nice, but then it creates this static mesh right here, and it defaults as triangulation. We can change that name right there, and I'm going to call this shield base. And I'm going to use this spline actor again to create another part of the shield. I'll hide the shield base for right now and make sure that that spline actor is selected again. Then back over here in our modeling mode under create, we'll click on mesh splines again. And I'm going to go to the flatten method right here and change that. Right now it says do not flatten. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to choose to best fit plane. What that does is it opens up a few more options. The combine method, I'm going to leave separate. And then you'll notice there's our thickness again. But under offset now, this is a new option. We can treat this as closed, or we can use this to offset our mesh from this spline. So if I choose offset and then begin to adjust the numbers, you'll see that it starts moving outside of the spline, or if we go back and go into a negative number, it starts decreasing the size of the mesh. So that can be very helpful. So if I wanted to create inside of this shield a smaller section of it that very much keeps to the contour of the shield itself, then I can decrease that. And I'll actually go ahead and create that. I'll set that to a -50 right there. And then I'll hit accept on that. And we'll see over here again, we have that new mesh that we just created. I'm going to label that as shield inner piece. And I'll hide this because I want to create one more piece. Again, back to the spline actor, over here to mesh splines, and we'll explore this offset one more time. In the options there, we have another option we can look at right here under offset outer side. We can change that to both sides. Click on that, and you see that it creates a type of outline mesh for this. So I'm going to bring that back up and decrease the size of it so you can go in either direction there. So I'll just bring that back into a positive direction there and maybe set that to 15. And I'm going to make one more adjustment to this. You may notice that these corners right here are not pointed. I'm going to go back up here into my error tolerance, and I'm going to adjust that and keep adjusting it until we should come to a point where we can get those pointed. And so I'm going to set that there now that I have pointed edges right there. And then I'll hit accept. And I'm going to label this shield outline. And so now we have our 3 pieces that we can work with in creating this shield. I'm going to move out of modeling mode back into motion design mode. So we can see the difference between these 3 pieces. I'm going to go ahead and add some materials to them. I will make these materials available down in the description so you can download them, then import them into Unreal Engine. I'll start with the shield outline, and the material that I'm going to apply to it is this brown metal right here. I'm going to select it, then I'm going to go over here to the shield outline, and I'm going to drop down and just click this button right here, and it will apply that material to the shield outline. Then I'll go to the shield base right there, go back over here into the content drawer, and I'm going to use this brown right here for the shield base. Select it. Back over here in the outliner, click that button and apply it. And then we have the shield inner piece. Select it and come over here to content drawer, and I want this brown right there. And we'll jump back in and select that. We're not seeing it because it is behind this other piece, so we're going to need to lay these out just a little bit. I want the outline to be in front of the base. So let me go to the outline, make a few adjustments here so we can get to this. And I'll get to my location, and right here, I'm going to set this to a -2. And that brings that outline on top of the base. And then we want that inner piece right there. We'll set that to a -3. And so now they're all in a stacking order that works. I want to jump out of creating the shield for just a moment and show you another way that you can draw splines. I'm in motion design mode, but I'm going to jump over into modeling mode real quick. And you'll see here, we have been using this mesh splines right there, but you can also draw splines. Before I use the draw spline, I want to jump into another view here. I'm going to jump out of my camera right there, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm in the default viewport, and then I'm going to select the back option right there. This puts us on the Y and Z plane. And so I'm only going to draw on this plane here, and I won't be moving around in 3D space. This makes it a lot easier for me to understand what I'm drawing and what the results will be. So right down here on Draw Spline, I'm going to click on that, and you'll see the properties we have for this tool. We can choose to loop this. We have our output mode. There's 3 options there. We can create it as an empty actor, add it to an existing actor, and we can also create a blueprint that this is placed in. I'm going to stick with empty actor. And under that, we have the draw mode. There's 3 modes there. tangent draw, which is what I use the most, click auto tangent, and then free draw. I'll take a look at the second two first, and then come back to tangent draw. I'm going to select that, and then I'm just going to start clicking and then dragging. And as I click and drag, it creates a curved spline. I'm going to go ahead and click loop on that and close that out. I'll accept this, and you'll see we have that spline actor right there. You can come back to the points after that, and you can work with the tangents to adjust the shape. You also, just like we had earlier, the option to right-click and use any of these options here. We can also check Allow Discontinuous Splines, which will free up our tangents for these points. I'm going to go ahead and select that and delete it, and then I'll go back to Draw Spline and take a look at our free draw option. With the free draw option, you have this minimum point spacing. Right now it's set at 200. I'm going to bring that down to 100 right now, and that's the spacing between the points as you drag and draw the shape that you want. So if I click and hold and start dragging, you'll see that it's evenly spacing out those points based on the number that I input there. I'll stop right there and click loop. That closes that. You don't always have to close these, especially if you're going to use them as a path to animate something. Once I've drawn the shape, I'll hit accept. And again, we have that spline actor in our outliner. I'm going to delete this one and then take a look again at the draw spline, and I'm going to go to that tangent drag. This is more similar to what you would have in Illustrator or After Effects to draw splines. Click, drag, and you pull out your tangents, and then you can move to your next point and click and drag. You don't always have to click and drag. So if I want to just bring this to a point here, and then I can come back down here, click and drag, and then I can close that out. And once I've drawn that shape, I can hit accept, and then I can come back into any of the points and adjust the tangents. So you have three ways you can draw a shape. I'm going to go ahead and create a couple of shapes real quick just to demonstrate this. So draw spline. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit, and I'm just going to create a basic, very basic tree with the tangent drag here. So I'm going to click and drag my first point with tangents. Then I'll come up here, click another point, jump over just a little bit, click that point there, and then draw another tangent down here. And then I'm going to click loop right there to close that out. I'll hit accept on this, and then I can shape this just a little bit more with my tangents and the points. Let me go in here and select Allow Discontinuous Splines, and I'll just kind of continue shaping this a little bit for the tree trunk. Let's draw some rounded shapes in here for the top of our tree. And at first this is going to look pretty messed up, but I'll come back in and fix all of this in just a minute. And I'm going to loop that right there, hit accept, and then I'm going to go for my discontinuous splines right there, and I can begin to shape these. And I think I'm going to delete that one point right there and bring this one over a bit. And there we have a basic shape for a tree. And so with these two splines created, I'll shift this over just a little bit, bring it up. We can then mesh both of them. So with that one selected, I'm going to hit Mesh Splines. I'll bring that tolerance down to around 0.1. And I'll set the thickness to 1 right there. And then I'm going to hit accept. And then I'll go to my first spline there. And again, hit Mesh Splines. I'll go with those settings also, and then accept. I'll label this tree branches and label this tree trunk. So with that done, I'm going to jump out, go back to our motion design viewport, and we are in our camera right there. I'm going to select both of those and bring them down into view. And if you want to keep those spline actors, you can. I'm going to hide them for right now. There's our tree. So we could go into both of these and create materials for them. I'll just add some colors to them real quick. Hit continue there. Go to the base color. I'm going to change this to a solid color, and we want some green leaves up there. So I'll bring that in, hit OK, and close that out. Normally I'd save that, but for this demonstration real quick, I'm just going to make these colors very quickly. And there again, base color, we'll change this to solid color and bring in a brown. Maybe bring that a little bit darker. And we'll close that out. So you can see how you can create any number of shapes using either the draw spline here in the modeling mode or in the motion design mode here. You can start off with the spline actor. Let's head back to the shield, and I'll explore two more ways that you can use splines to create meshes. Okay. I want to use this spline actor in a couple of other ways to add some more elements to this. What I want to do is add some bolts around this edge here. And to do that, we'll add in an ellipse and a cloner. So let's add in the ellipse first. So I'm going to go over here to the 2D shapes, double click on the ellipse. That ellipse is right there. Keep in mind it's probably behind everything, so we're not going to see it right now. I'm going to make some adjustments to it, and I'm going to go ahead and label this bolt. We'll drop down here, and in our mesh size, let's drop this down to 5. And we're going to add some modifiers to this. So with it selected, we'll jump up here to the operator stack, go to the modifiers, and we're going to add in an extrude first. And we don't need much of an extrude on this. We'll drop this down to 2. And I'm going to add in another modifier, the bevel right there. And let me open this up. And on the inset, we're going to keep that to 1. On the iterations there, we'll bring that up to 3. And on the rounding, let's set that to 1.1. I'm going to go back to the motion design outliner right there, and I'm going to select the bolt. And what I'll do is I'll bring it close to us so that we can see what we've created and rotate that just a little bit. So that's what we've created. And we'll go ahead and add the material to it. So that's going to be the little bolt head that we're going to have populating around the edge of our shield. Let me bring this back up. And the material for this that I'm going to apply is going to be the gold. So I'm going to go in here to material type, select asset right there, and I'm just going to type in gold, and it should bring up the gold that we have. This one right here, MD_gold. I'm going to apply it, and then I'll reset the location and rotation, and now we'll clone this with the cloner. So let's go over here to our actors, and we want that cloner actor. Just double click on it. And that's in our outliner right here. I'm going to open up the cloner right there, and we're going to get rid of that default clone, delete it, hit delete right there. And then we want to drop that bolt in the cloner. And you'll see a number of our bolts right there. We're going to make some changes to this cloner so that it uses this spline actor to line up around the outside of the shield. So in the cloner properties there, we want to drop down to our layout right there. And we'll go to grid, and we're going to drop down to spline. That's going to give us the option to select that spline. So right here in the drop down menu, we'll look for that spline, that first spline actor right there. And you'll see it's already starting to populate around the edges there. Now this is up to you how many of these bolts you want in there. I went ahead and added in 40. But you can play with that number right there and add in as many as you would like to. I'm going to label here on cloner that this is our bolts cloner. And we do need to change the location of this because let me deselect everything. You see that we don't see our bolts at this point because they're behind this piece right here. So we want to bring them out front. So I'll select that, go down to location, and I'm going to set this to a -3. And now those bolts should be sitting on top of our outline right there. We'll deselect, We need to make one more adjustment. We're not seeing them very well, and it's the rotation of the ellipse itself, the bolt itself. So let's go back into our cloner there, select the bolt, and right there on the y-axis, we need to set that to 90 degrees. And now they're all facing us, so we see them much better. So that's another way that you can use the spline actor or a spline in this cloner so that all of the objects will follow the path of that spline. We're going to use it in one other way. I'm going to create a trim in this area right here. To begin building the trim out, I want to duplicate the spline actor because I don't want to use this copy because we're actually going to make adjustments to it. So select it and Control D, and we should have this spline actor too. This will be the one that we use for the trim. And now we'll need an ellipse. So back over here in our 2D shapes, I'm just going to double click on the ellipse, drop that in, and I'll make one adjustment to this right now. I'm going to bring the size of this on the mesh size down to 3, and we're going to add a modifier to it. Let's go ahead and label this trim, and then we'll go up in the operator stack and go to add modifiers right there, and we want this spline sweep. And so this spline sweep is going to take the spline that we use, add to it, and sweep this ellipse around it. If you don't understand that right now, I'll demonstrate this in a way that you can clearly understand what's going on. But what we need to do now is we need to select that spline actor 2 right there. So select it, and we're going to need to rotate it in just a moment. Let's go ahead and do that now. It'll make it a little bit easier to see and explain this. So back in our location down here, just to make sure, we should, as long as we have this operator stack selected, we should still be on that trim ellipse right there, but just to be sure. And then we'll drop down into the rotation, and right there on the Y, let's set that to 90. Now you see it's somewhat taking the shape of the shield. So we need to go back into the operator stack right there and to make some adjustments. I'm going to bring the steps all the way up to 100. That affects the contour of the shape. Obviously, you see it makes it much smoother. And I'm going to bring this down more in place. So we'll bring that down to a -200 right there. But what I want to do is, for right now, just so you get a better idea of how this spline sweep works, I'm going to rotate it just a little bit more so we can see it from the side. And then I'm going to bring up the size of the ellipse right there. So it's taking the spline and it is using the shape of the ellipse to sweep around that spline. So you can create all types of things with this. So you see, like right here, this is a tube. You can use these other shapes, the rectangle, the regular polygon, star, any of these shapes. You can use one of these shapes and sweep around a spline for whatever purpose you want to create. I'm going to bring the size back down to 3 and bring that rotation back around so that we're in the right direction. Set that to 0. Now I want this trim to be in this area right here. So we're going to need to actually scale this down, but it's not going to be the spline that we scale. That actually does not affect it. You can see that the spline is scaling, but the trim is not. So we're going to actually need to scale this trim. Let me go back to that spline and bring that up to 1 on the scale on my position so that we can see it. I'm going to bring this out. I'm going to set that to a -3. That brings it out, and so we should see it now. And then I'll make some adjustments to our scale on that ellipse, that trim ellipse right there. I'm going to bring the scale down to 0.85, and I'll adjust the location here on the Z value to a -175. That'll bring it up into place. Because of the way that it's scaled, here on the top and the bottom, it's not quite fitting the way that I want it to. So what I'll do is go into this spline actor that it's based on, and we can actually make adjustments to it. Now keep in mind, it didn't scale down itself. It's just the ellipse that is wrapped around it has actually scaled. So the spline actor is right here still on the outer edges. So I'm going to go to this point right here, click on it, and I'm going to drag it up, and you'll see that it does affect the trim right there. And then I'll drop down here to the bottom point and do the same thing. I'm just bringing it down about 1 click on that. And I feel like that fits a little bit better. We could go in and adjust the tangents and all of that, but for this demonstration, this works for me. So I'm going to click out of that and we can see the results of it. I'm going to hide that spline actor because we're seeing a little bit of it here at the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to hide that. And now we can go back down to our trim here and add in our material for this. I'm going to use that same gold that we used on the bolts for this. So in the material options right there, I'll go to Asset and search for that gold. Add that in, and then I'm just going to click on Label right there to deselect everything. And this is what we have at this point. I'm going to go back to the original tutorial on this and add in the SVG of the Lion and drop that right in the middle there so that we can finish this out. I've already imported that in and I have that SVG right there. And so I'm going to grab it, drag it in, drop it, and we'll go to the properties once it is populated and drop down here into the properties. And I'll scale that up to 2.5 and bring that down just a little bit. I'm going to extrude it, say to an extrusion of 3. And it is still kind of behind everything. It is popping out now, so we can add a material to this. But on the position for it, right there, I'm going to set that to a -2. That'll be out a little bit farther, closer to us. And I'm going to add that same gold material in on top of it. To do that, we're going to need to drop down into this area right here. Again, make sure that that SVG line is selected. And we're going to need to add that material to all of these 5 pieces right here. So let me go into my content drawer, go to my materials, select that gold, and then we'll drop back over here and select these one at a time. And we can go right here, click that button on each of them, and that will add that gold in to all 5 fill components right there. All right, to finish this up, I want to combine all of this together so that it can be animated. Usually what I would do is combine all of this together in a null object. Okay, in trying to finish this up, I was having a lot of problems with the bolts right there. Every time that I would either put them in a null or make them a child of another object, they would not stay in place. I was trying to combine all of this so that I could animate this. There is an option that I saw earlier, forgot about it, but in trying to fix this, came across it again. So in the bolts cloner, in that cloner right there, we want to select it and we want to drop down in the details panel. We'll drop way down here and we have these options right here, these utilities. And what we want to do is we want to convert the entire cloner to a static mesh. Now I do want to make sure, let me check right here. I want to go ahead and set this back to 0. And we'll bring that back out in just a moment. But we'll go back down here now, and I'm going to convert this to static mesh, not to meshes, but to static mesh. I want that whole cloner and all of those 40 bolts to be one static mesh. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to drop that right in there in generated, that folder right there, and hit OK. It's going to do that conversion. And once that's done, we have a new object added. You'll see right there, bolts cloner merged. I'm going to go ahead and hide this, and then I'll bring these bolts back out so that we can see them. So back up here in location, I'm going to make sure that the static mesh of that cloner is selected and set that to -3. That puts those bolts back in place where I want them. Now I should be able to wrap all of this up into a null object and animate that. So I'm going to select everything that I need. I'll start down here. I added in a background. I don't need that. I do need those merged bolts. I don't need the cloner. And then I'll go with the rest of this up to right there. And I'll select the null object. It wraps all of that up into the null object. Now we'll be able to animate that as the entire shield. And I'll go ahead and label that shield. Bring this down into the sequencer. And we'll need the transform properties for it. So go right there and select transform. That will give us our location, rotation, and scale. And we're only going to need to rotate this on the yaw. So I'll bring that down. And right here at the beginning of the sequence, I'll set a keyframe for that property. I'm going to go ahead and make that linear, and then jump to the back end of our sequence and set that to 360. That sets that last keyframe there, and now we should be able to play through this, and everything stays in place as it should. For more on motion media design, check out my other videos and hit the like and subscribe button. Down in the description of this tutorial, you'll find this link right here to this Gumroad page where you can download some of the materials that I'm using in this tutorial. Once you've downloaded the materials and you want to add them to the project, you'll need to go into the project itself and create a folder. I'm here in Windows Explorer, and this is the location of the project on my hard drive. I'm going to double click on that and open that up, and you'll see this is how Unreal Engine stores a project. That's the actual file that will open up the project, but the other folders here make up the project. We want to go into this content folder right here. I'm going to double click on it. I already have a materials folder from where I was working on this earlier, so I'm going to add in a second one. I'm just going to right click, go to new, and do folder, and I'll label this materials 2. And as soon as I hit enter on that, you'll see right here in my project, that materials 2 folder showed up. So I'm going to go into the project there, and now I'm going to need the materials that I downloaded. Here's the materials that I downloaded, and I unzipped them from the zip file. I'm actually going to need to move these materials twice. First, from the downloads file, I'm just going to copy them, Control C right there. Then I'm going to go back into that new materials 2 folder that I created in Windows Explorer, open it up and paste them in. And then from that point, I'm going to just select all of them and then drag them into the Unreal Materials 2 folder right there. You'll get all of these errors over here, but that actually populates them in this Materials 2 folder. Now you'll have access to them in Unreal Engine.